Success is the best revenge, they say. I never planned on proving that saying true until my parents uninvited me from my sister's dream wedding, not knowing that I owned the exclusive venue they'd been desperately trying to book for months. The irony would have been amusing if it hadn't been so painful. But let me start from the beginning, because this story is about more than just a wedding venue. It's about how being overlooked became my greatest motivation to succeed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany desk beneath my fingers felt solid and real as I reviewed the contract for the 5th time. Outside my office window, the setting sun painted the restored Victorian mansion's gardens in hues of gold and amber. The Rosewood Estate, my estate, had become the most sought-after wedding venue in New England, though few knew the name behind its success. The transformation from a crumbling historic property to a premier destination had been my life's work, though my family still thought I was just an event planner working for someone else. I'm Alexandra Pierce, though my family still calls me Alex, when they bother to call at all. 10 years ago, I was the forgotten middle child, sandwiched between my older sister Catherine, the perfect one, and my younger brother James, the baby of the family. While my parents poured their resources into Catherine's modeling career and James's startup ventures, I worked weekends and summers at my grandmother's catering company, learning the intricacies of the event planning business from the ground up. Those early years taught me more than just how to coordinate events. My grandmother, Marie, showed me how to see potential where others saw problems. When clients complained about venue limitations, she would redesign entire spaces with clever draping and strategic lighting. When budgets were tight, she created magnificence through creativity rather than expenditure. The secret, she would tell me as we transformed ordinary spaces into wonderlands, is to understand that true luxury isn't about how much you spend. It's about how much you notice. The irony of today's situation wasn't lost on me. The elegant letterhead on my desk bore the same name that my sister's wedding planner had been frantically trying to contact for the past 3 months. The Rosewood Estate maintained an air of mystery by design. All bookings went through a management company, and I remained the silent owner, letting my work speak for itself. Each successful event, each glowing review, each breathtaking photo, spread in bridal magazines validated my decision to pursue my own path, rather than following my family's prescribed route to success. My phone buzzed with a familiar number, my mother. I let it go to voicemail, just as I had done with her previous 5 calls this week. The last conversation we'd had still rang in my ears, clear as crystal despite the 3 weeks that had passed. Every word had cut deep, reopening old wounds I thought had long since healed. "Alexandra," she had said, her voice carrying that familiar note of disappointment. "I just don't understand why you're being so difficult about contributing to your sister's wedding fund. Catherine deserves the perfect day, and as family, we all need to pitch in. Your brother James has already offered to handle the technology aspects, even though his latest startup is in a crucial phase." I had remained silent, remembering the years of student loans I'd taken on while Catherine's modeling pursuits were fully funded. The nights I'd spent working double shifts at catering events while James received seed money for his 3rd failed startup attempt. The countless family dinners where my achievements were overlooked in favor of Catherine's latest photo shoot or James's newest business idea. "Mom," I had replied carefully, measuring each word, "I've built my own business from nothing. Every spare dollar I have is reinvested in my company's growth. I can't just—" "That's exactly your problem," she had interrupted, her voice sharp with frustration. "You're always so focused on your little event planning business. Catherine is going to be the face of a major fashion brand, and here you are, still playing with table settings and flower arrangements. When are you going to do something meaningful with your life?" The conversation had deteriorated from there, ending with my mother's ultimatum, either contribute significantly to the wedding fund or consider myself uninvited. "We don't need your negativity ruining Catherine's special day," she had declared before hanging up. What my family didn't know was that my little event planning business had evolved into something far greater. Starting with small events and careful savings, I had spotted the potential in the crumbling Victorian mansion that would become the Rosewood Estate. Years of sweat equity, strategic loans, and an unwavering vision had transformed it into a venue that now had a 3-year waiting list. Each unique feature, the grand staircase restored to its original glory, the modern amenities seamlessly integrated into historical architecture, the meticulously maintained gardens, represented countless hours of work and determination. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Ms. Pierce?" My assistant Rachel entered with a stack of papers. "The latest inquiry from the Carter wedding planner just came in. They're getting quite persistent about booking for next June. They've offered to pay double our standard rate." June, the same month as Catherine's wedding. I picked up the latest letter from Catherine's wedding planner, who had been trying to secure the Rosewood Estate through every professional connection possible. The desperation in their emails had grown with each passing week as other venues were booked up. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. My sister's perfect day now depended on my little business. "Rachel," I said, making a decision, "please schedule a meeting with Catherine's wedding planner for tomorrow morning. It's time to have a conversation about family obligations and professional success." As I prepared for the meeting that would inevitably shake my family's perceptions, I couldn't help but smile at the twists life sometimes takes. My parents had always taught us that success was about seizing opportunities. They just never expected me to seize mine in a way they couldn't control or claim credit for. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the Rosewood Estate's conference room, casting rainbow patterns across the antique oak table. I had personally overseen the restoration of these windows, spending months tracking down artisans who could match the original 1890s craftsmanship. Every detail in this room, from the hand-carved crown molding to the custom-designed chandelier, represented a decision I had made, a victory I had earned. Across the table sat Vivian Taylor, my sister Catherine's wedding planner, her designer, suit and perfectly coiffed hair reflecting the high-end clientele she typically served. She hadn't recognized me when she walked in. Why would she? Our paths had crossed at various industry events over the years, but I had always maintained a professional distance, operating through my management company rather than making personal appearances. "Ms. Taylor," I began, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I understand you've been quite persistent in trying to book the Rosewood Estate for June 15th. I opened the leather portfolio containing her numerous inquiries, each one more urgent than the last. "Yes, absolutely." Vivian leaned forward eagerly. "My client, Catherine Pierce, has her heart set on your venue. We've looked at every premium location in New England, but nothing compares to the Rosewood Estate. The architectural details, the gardens, it's exactly what she's dreamed of for her wedding." I allowed myself a moment of pride. Catherine, who had spent our childhood dismissing my career choices, now viewed my creation as the epitome of elegance. "Tell me more about the wedding plans," I prompted, curious to hear how my sister envisioned her perfect day. Vivian launched into an enthusiastic description of Catherine's vision. A grand affair for 300 guests, celebrity photographers, a feature spread in a major bridal magazine. "Money is no object," she assured me. "The bride's parents are prepared to pay whatever premium necessary to secure the date." My parents, who had never supported my business aspirations, were now willing to spend a small fortune to access the fruits of my labor. The irony was almost poetic. "Ms. Taylor," I said, sliding a business card across the table, "I believe there's something you should know about the Rosewood Estate's ownership." I watched as she read my card, her eyes widening, as recognition dawned. You're Catherine's sister?" Vivian's professional composure slipped for a moment. But she said, I mean, I was told you worked in event planning, but I own the Rosewood estate, I confirmed, allowing the weight of those words to settle in the room. I purchased it 5 years ago when it was practically condemned. Every renovation, every improvement, every detail you see around you, that's my work. Vivian's face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, embarrassment, and finally, calculation. This is wonderful news, she exclaimed, recovering quickly. With your personal connection, surely we can expedite the booking process. Your sister will be thrilled to know. My sister doesn't know, I interrupted gently. Neither do my parents. And before we proceed, there's something else you should be aware of. I pulled out another document, the email containing my mother's ultimatum about the wedding. I've been uninvited from the celebration. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Vivian's eyes darted between my face and the email, her professional training warring with the awkwardness of the situation. I see, she finally managed. This is unexpected. How would you like to proceed? I stood and walked to the window, touching the restored stained glass that had become a symbol of my journey. Each piece had been carefully cleaned, repaired, and reinforced, transforming what had once been broken into something even more beautiful than the original. The Rosewood estate has a very specific mission, I explained, turning back to face her. We don't just host weddings, we create legacies. Every couple who celebrates here becomes part of our history, and we become part of theirs. Our success is built on authenticity, integrity, and genuine connections. I returned to my seat, meeting Vivian's gaze directly. I won't deny my sister the venue out of spite. That's not who I am, and it's not what the Rosewood estate represents. But I won't pretend to be just another vendor either. If Catherine wants to get married here, she'll need to understand exactly whose venue she's choosing. Vivian nodded slowly, her professional demeanor returning. How would you suggest we handle this situation? Schedule a site visit, I replied, my decision crystallizing as I spoke. Bring Catherine, my parents, everyone involved in the planning. It's time for them to see exactly what their little event planner has built. As Vivian gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. You know, Ms. Pierce, I've been in this industry for 15 years. I've worked with some of the most exclusive venues in the country. What you've created here, it's extraordinary. After she left, I remained in the conference room, watching the rainbow patterns shift across the table as the sun moved higher in the sky. Tomorrow would bring either a long overdue reconciliation or a final severing of family ties. Either way, I would face it standing firmly on the foundation I had built for myself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning of the site visit arrived with an unseasonable chill. I stood in my office, adjusting my tailored charcoal suit, a far cry from the second-hand clothes I'd worn during the estate's renovation years. Through the window, I watched my maintenance team making their final preparations, ensuring every flower bed was immaculate, every pathway pristine. The Rosewood estate wasn't just a business. It was a testament to every person who had believed in my vision when my own family wouldn't. My phone lit up with a text from Rachel. They're here, 5 minutes out. I took a deep breath, remembering my grandmother Marie's words from years ago. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. She had passed away 2 years before I acquired the estate, leaving me her catering company's client list and enough seed money for a down payment. More importantly, she had left me her unwavering belief in my potential. The sound of cars crunching on gravel drew my attention back to the present. Through the window, I watched as my family emerged from their vehicles, my mother in her designer suit, my father looking uncomfortable in his rarely worn tie, and Catherine, radiant as always, clutching her fiancé David's arm. James had apparently decided not to attend, probably too busy with his latest venture to bother with a venue tour. Vivian Taylor greeted them at the entrance, right on schedule. I watched as she began her standard tour presentation, noting my mother's approving nods at the meticulously maintained Victorian architecture. Catherine's eyes were wide as she took in the grand entrance hall, its restored chandelier casting prismatic light across the marble floors I'd spent months sourcing to match the original. The Rosewood Estate specializes in creating uniquely personalized experiences, Vivian was explaining as the group moved through the main hall. Every detail can be customized to the couple's vision, from the lighting design to the garden arrangements. It's absolutely perfect, Catherine breathed, running her hand along the hand-carved banister. Even better than the pictures. But why has it been so difficult to book? Surely they understand who we are in the community. I smiled slightly at that. Catherine had always believed our family name opened every door. She had yet to learn that true respect was earned, not inherited. The tour continued through the estate's primary entertainment spaces. I had deliberately instructed Vivian to follow the standard route, allowing my family to form their impressions before the bigger revelation. Through the security feeds displayed on my office monitors, I watched their reactions. The attention to detail is remarkable, my father commented, examining the period-accurate crown molding. Whoever restored this place must have invested millions. And the gardens, my mother's voice carried through the feed. Catherine, darling, imagine. Your photos out there among the roses. They're even your preferred shade of pink. Of course they were. I had specifically cultivated that variety of rose after Catherine had mentioned her wedding color preferences at a family dinner 2 years ago. One of the few times she had actually spoken to me about her dreams, rather than just talking over me. Even then, I had been planning for this possibility, though I never imagined it would unfold quite this way. Now, Vivian announced, reaching the tour's crucial moment, I'd like to show you something special. The Rosewood Estate has a unique feature that sets it apart from other venues, a private museum documenting its restoration journey. She led them into what we called the Heritage Room, where I displayed photographs and artifacts from the estate's transformation. The walls told the story of how a neglected historical property had been reborn through vision and determination. These photographs, Vivian continued, gesturing to a particular series, document the owner's hands-on involvement in every aspect of the restoration. From architectural planning to garden design, every detail was personally overseen. Her voice trailed off as my mother stepped closer to one of the photographs, her face draining of color. The image showed me, covered in dust and debris, working alongside the restoration crew to salvage the original hardwood floors. It had been taken 3 years ago. During one of the many weekends I had told my family I was too busy with work to attend their gatherings. Alexandra? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. But this can't be. The owner you've been trying to reach, Vivian confirmed, her professional tone unwavering, is Alexandra Pierce. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine stood frozen, staring at another photograph, this one showing me overseeing the installation of the very chandelier she had been admiring moments before. My father had taken a step back, his eyes darting between the photographs and the luxurious surroundings, as if seeing them in an entirely new light. I chose that moment to make my entrance, my heels clicking purposefully on the marble floors I had salvaged and restored piece by piece. Welcome to the Rosewood Estate, I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I believe we have some details to discuss about a potential June booking. The Heritage Room's lighting cast subtle shadows across my family's faces as they processed the revelation. My mother was the first to recover, her social conditioning kicking in as she attempted to regain control of the situation. "Alexandra, darling," she began, her voice artificially bright. "Why didn't you tell us? This is incredible. We had no idea you were so successful." The word successful hung in the air, weighted with years of dismissal and underestimation. I maintained my professional demeanor, gesturing toward the conference room. "Shall we discuss the details of Catherine's booking request? I believe we have several matters to address." David, Catherine's fiancé, whom I had only met twice at family gatherings, looked between my sister and me with growing understanding. As an outsider to our family dynamics, he was perhaps seeing them clearly for the first time. He placed a steadying hand on Catherine's shoulder as she continued to stare at the photographs documenting my journey. Once seated in the conference room, I took my place at the head of the table, a position that visibly disconcerted my father. He had always been the one to lead family discussions, usually about Catherine's achievements or James's latest business ventures. Now, in my domain, the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. "The Rosewood estate typically books 18 months in advance," I began, opening a leather portfolio containing their inquiry documentation. "Your request for a June wedding, merely 4 months away, would normally be impossible to accommodate. However, given the circumstances, I'm willing to discuss options." "Options?" Catherine finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically small. "What do you mean, options? Vivian said you had the date available." I met my sister's gaze steadily. "The date is available because I held it in reserve, anticipating you might eventually seek to book here. I've turned down 12 other couples who requested that weekend, including an inquiry from the governor's daughter." My mother's eyes widened at this information. Status and connections had always been her currency of choice. The realization that I was now in a position to turn down such prestigious clients visibly shook her worldview. "However," I continued, "before we proceed, we need to address the elephant in the room. 3 weeks ago, I was informed that I was no longer welcome at this wedding because I refused to contribute to the expenses. The situation has obviously evolved, but the underlying issues remain unresolved." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Now, Alex, that was perhaps hasty. Your mother was just concerned about ensuring Catherine's perfect day. We didn't know you were in a position to contribute more significantly," I finished for him. "Or perhaps you meant you didn't know I was in a position to make decisions that would impact the success of Catherine's wedding? The irony is, I've been in that position for years. Every wedding we host here becomes part of our legacy. Each celebration contributes to our reputation. The Rosewood Estate's success isn't just about luxury or exclusivity. It's about creating meaningful experiences that honor both tradition and personal vision." I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rose gardens. "When I purchased this property, it was considered a worthless ruin. Every bank in the state had rejected my loan applications. Do you know who finally took a chance on me? Grandmother Marie's old catering clients. They remembered how I transformed their events on shoestring budgets. They believed in my vision when my own family dismissed it as a hobby." Turning back to face them, I continued, "The Rosewood Estate isn't just a venue. It's a testament to every person who saw potential where others saw failure. Every couple who celebrates here becomes part of that story. So yes, Catherine, I can host your wedding, but it won't be because of our family name or your status in the community. It will be because you understand and respect what this place represents." The silence that followed was profound. Catherine looked at her hands, then at David, before finally meeting my gaze. "All those times I bragged about my modeling contracts, my magazine covers. You were building this. While I was seeking the spotlight, you were creating something lasting. I never even asked about your work." "The booking contract is here," I said, placing a document on the table. "The terms are standard, with one addition, a portion of the fee will be donated to a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs, established in Grandmother Marie's name. She believed in investing in potential. It's time our family did the same. The afternoon light began to fade as we concluded our meeting, casting long shadows across the conference room. My mother had remained unusually quiet after my announcement about the scholarship fund, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the embossed logo on the contract. The gesture reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years: how she used to trace the spines of my grandfather's leather-bound books when she was deep in thought, a habit I had inherited without realizing it. "I'd like a tour," she said suddenly, looking up from the contract. "Not the standard client tour we just had. I want to see everything through your eyes, Alexandra. Help me understand how you built this." The request surprised me. In all my years of working at my grandmother's catering company and later developing the Rosewood estate, my mother had never once asked to see my work up close. Her interest had always been cursory, filtered through the lens of how it compared to Catherine's modeling career or James's business ventures. "I'll need to reschedule my afternoon appointments," I said, checking my calendar. "Rachel, could—" "You, already done," my assistant interjected smoothly from the doorway. "I've moved your meetings to tomorrow, and the Thompson wedding consultation has been rescheduled for next week." She paused, then added, "I also took the liberty of having Chef Marcus prepare refreshments in the garden house. I thought you might want to show them the new conservatory project." I smiled, grateful once again for Rachel's intuition. She had been with me since the early days, one of the few who had seen the estate's transformation from beginning to end. "Catherine, David," I addressed my sister and her fiancé, "would you like to join us?" David stood immediately, his interest evident. As an architect himself, though I hadn't known this detail until today, he had been asking insightful questions about the restoration throughout the standard tour. Catherine hesitated, glancing at her phone, a habit she had developed during her modeling years, always checking for messages from her agent. "Your next shoot isn't until Thursday," David reminded her gently. "This is more important." My father cleared his throat. "I should probably head back to the office." "The quarterly reports?" "Harold," my mother interrupted, using a tone I hadn't heard since we were children. "You need to see this too. The reports can wait." The private tour began in the basement, where I had discovered the estate's original blueprints hidden behind a loose brick. "This was my first real breakthrough," I explained, showing them the carefully preserved documents. The previous owners had modified the house so many times that the original design was lost. These blueprints helped us understand the building's true character. As we moved through the house, I shared the stories behind each restoration decision. The hidden doorway we uncovered during demolition, now restored to connect the main ballroom to a secret garden. The ancient grapevines we saved from the overgrown courtyard, now producing fruit for our in-house winery. Each detail had a purpose, a history, a future. In the garden house, over Chef Marcus's carefully prepared tea service, Catherine finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. "Why didn't you tell us? All these years, when we talked about my modeling or James's startups, why didn't you say anything about what you were building?" I considered my response carefully, stirring honey into my tea. Honey from our own beehives, another detail that made the Rosewood estate unique. "Do you remember when I first started working for Grandmother's catering company? I was 16, and I came home excited about learning to create towering ice sculptures and complex sugar work. You were preparing for your first major photo shoot, and James was pitching his first app idea to Dad." My mother's hand stilled on her teacup, recognition flickering across her face. "I remember," she said softly. "We were all focused on the photo shoot. We barely listened to you. After that, I stopped sharing," I continued. "Not because I was hiding anything, but because I realized something important. My passion didn't need an audience to be valid. Every restored window, every salvaged floorboard, every rescued rosebush was a victory in itself. I learned to find satisfaction in the work, not in others' recognition of it. David leaned forward, architect's eye scanning the garden house's innovative design. But surely you must have wanted them to know, especially when you started succeeding on this scale. Success isn't measured by others' awareness of it, I replied, echoing my grandmother's wisdom. The Rosewood estate hosts 50 weddings a year. Each one represents a couple who chose us not because of my family name or connections, but because of what we've built here. That validation means more than any recognition ever could. As we concluded our tea in the garden house, an unexpected visitor arrived. James, my younger brother, burst through the door, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled and his expression frantic. "Is it true?" he demanded, waving his phone. "Alex owns the Rosewood estate? Why didn't anyone tell me?" The irony of his entrance wasn't lost on me. James had always had a flair for dramatic timing, usually appearing just as attention was focused elsewhere. But this time, his interruption felt different. There was genuine shock in his eyes, mixed with something I'd never seen from him before: respect. "I just got off a call with Senator Mitchell's office," he continued, barely pausing for breath. "They're planning his daughter's engagement party, and when they mentioned this venue, I looked it up. The business structure, the renovation strategy, the brand development, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." Coming from James, who had spent years dismissing my work as just party planning, this assessment carried particular weight. He had always considered himself the family's business genius, despite his string of failed startups. Now he was looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Have a seat, James," I offered, gesturing to an empty chair. "Chef Marcus, could we trouble you for another setting?" Our chef nodded, disappearing briefly before returning with an additional place setting and fresh scones. "I don't understand," James said, accepting a cup of tea with uncharacteristic humility. "How did you manage all this without any investors? Without publicity? Without?" He glanced at our father. "Without family connections?" I stood and walked to the garden house's glass walls, watching the sunset paint the rose gardens in shades of gold. "Do you remember grandmother's old filing cabinet? The one in her office that none of us could ever open?" My family nodded, puzzled by the apparent non sequitur. "After she passed away, I inherited her catering company's records," I continued. "That filing cabinet contained more than just recipes and client lists. It held 30 years of detailed notes on every event she had ever managed, every crisis she had solved, every innovation she had created, every relationship she had built." Opening a concealed panel in the garden house's wooden walls, I revealed a similar filing system. I followed her example. Every wedding we've hosted. Here, every challenge we've overcome. Every improvement we've made. It's all documented. Not for publicity or praise, but because success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about what you learn along the way. James approached the files, his business mind clearly intrigued. "This is incredible. The level of detail, the systematic approach to problem solving." He pulled out a folder at random. "You've created contingency plans for everything from power outages to flash floods." That particular plan was developed after a storm. Nearly derailed the Chen wedding last spring, I explained. We managed to move the entire ceremony indoors in under 30 minutes, transforming our backup spaces into something even more magical than the original outdoor setting. The bride later told us it was perfect, not despite the change of plans, but because of how we handled it. My mother, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "I remember that wedding. It was featured in Modern Bride magazine. They called it an ingenious blend of crisis management and creative vision." She paused, looking somewhat ashamed. "I read the article but never made the connection that it was your venue." "The magazine coverage was unexpected," I admitted. We don't seek publicity. Our reputation grows through word of mouth, through the experiences we create, through the problems we solve. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to innovate. Catherine, who had been unusually quiet, stood and walked to the files. "May I?" she asked, reaching for a folder. I nodded, and she pulled out a detailed plan for a winter wonderland wedding we had hosted last December. "This is amazing. Alex, you're not just planning events, you're creating experiences that people will remember forever." "That's exactly it," I agreed. "Every couple who celebrates here becomes part of our story, and we become part of theirs. It's not about having the most expensive flowers or the most elaborate decorations. It's about understanding what makes each celebration unique and finding ways to bring that vision to life." James was still examining the files, his expression thoughtful. "You know, this system you've developed, it could revolutionize the entire industry. Have you considered publishing a manual or offering consulting services?" "Actually," I smiled, walking to my desk and retrieving a leather-bound portfolio, "I've been developing something along those lines, but not for profit." I opened the portfolio to reveal plans for an educational program I had been designing. "Remember the scholarship fund I mentioned? This is the next phase. A comprehensive training program for aspiring event planners and venue managers, focusing on both the practical and creative aspects of the business." The evening light had faded completely now, and the garden house's strategic lighting created an intimate atmosphere as I spread out the educational program plans across the table. Rachel had quietly arranged for dinner to be served. Chef Marcus's signature small plates appearing as if by magic as I explained my vision. "The program will offer full scholarships to 10 students each year," I explained, pointing to the curriculum outline. "We'll focus on individuals who have the passion, but lack the resources or connections to enter the industry traditionally. Each student will receive hands-on training, mentorship, and real-world experience right here at the Rosewood Estate." "But that's not all," Rachel interjected, unable to contain her excitement. She had been instrumental in developing this aspect of the program. "Show them the community initiative, Alexandra." I pulled out another set of plans, these showing a series of smaller venues scattered throughout different neighborhoods. "We've identified 5 historic properties in underserved communities, properties that, like the Rosewood Estate originally, have been written off as lost causes. Our graduates will have the opportunity to manage these venues, implementing everything they've learned here while serving communities that rarely have access to spaces like this." My father, who had been quiet for most of the evening, leaned forward with sudden interest. "These properties, they're all owned by the city's historical society, aren't they? The ones they've been trying to offload for years?" I nodded, pleased he had made the connection. "Yes, I've been in negotiations with them for months. They're willing to lease the properties to our foundation for a nominal fee, provided we handle all renovations and maintenance. Each venue will serve dual purposes, as event spaces and as community centers." That's actually brilliant," James admitted, his business acumen clearly engaged. "The renovation costs would be offset by event revenue, while the community programs would qualify for various grants and tax incentives. But the real value would be in the social impact." "Exactly," I confirmed. "Every wedding or celebration at these venues helps fund free or low-cost space for community gatherings, educational programs, and local cultural events. Our graduates won't just be learning how to run successful venues, they'll be learning how to build sustainable community assets." Catherine, who had been studying the plans intently, looked up with tears in her eyes. "This is what grandmother always talked about, isn't it? She used to say that true success isn't measured by what you gain, but by what you give back." "I remember that," my mother said softly. "She would say it at every family dinner, but I'm not sure any of us really understood what she meant." She paused, looking around the garden house with new appreciation. "Until now." David, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "You know, my firm has been looking for meaningful community projects to support. We specialize in historical renovation, and if you're going to be restoring 5 properties..." He trailed off suggestively. "Are you offering your services, David?" I asked, intrigued by this unexpected development. "Pro bono," he confirmed. "We could use it as a training opportunity for our junior architects, pair them with your students, make it a true collaborative learning experience." The possibilities started expanding in my mind. That could work perfectly with the educational component. Your architects could teach our students about historical preservation, structural considerations, and our students could teach your architects about event space functionality, flow management, and how design choices impact event execution, Rachel added, already taking notes. James, not to be outdone, jumped in. "I might have something to contribute to. My latest startup, the one that actually seems to be working, it's a project management platform. We could customize it for venue management, give your students cutting-edge tools to work with." I sat back, watching my family transform from passive observers to active participants in my vision. The change was remarkable. Instead of measuring my success against their expectations, they were finding ways to contribute to it, each bringing their unique skills and perspectives to the table. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a final document. "The foundation needs a board of directors, people who understand both the business and philanthropic aspects of what we're trying to achieve, people who can help guide these venues to become true community assets while maintaining their financial viability." The implications of my last statement hung in the air. A board of directors meant formal roles, responsibilities, and a level of commitment that would fundamentally change our family's dynamic. My mother was the first to grasp the full meaning behind my words. "You're offering us positions on the board," she said slowly, her voice carrying a mix of surprise and something else, understanding, perhaps, of the olive branch I was extending. "Not offering, considering," I clarified, pulling out a series of detailed portfolios. "These positions come with significant responsibilities. I've prepared role descriptions, expectations, and required commitments for each position. This isn't about titles or family obligations. It's about building something sustainable that can truly impact communities." Rachel distributed the portfolios as I continued. "Dad, your experience in financial management could help ensure these community venues remain viable while serving their social mission. James, your technology background could modernize our operations across all locations. Catherine, your media expertise could help us tell these communities' stories effectively. And Mom," I paused, meeting her eyes directly, "your networking skills could help us build partnerships with other organizations doing similar work." My father opened his portfolio, adjusting his reading glasses. His eyebrows rose as he reviewed the detailed financial projections and responsibility breakdowns. "This is extremely thorough, Alexandra. You've thought through every aspect." "I learned from watching your business practices," I acknowledged. "All those years of observing how you structured deals and managed relationships, I was paying attention, even if it didn't seem like it at the time." James was already scanning through the technology integration plans. "This is ambitious," he said, but his tone was appreciative rather than dismissive. "Connecting 5 venues, managing multiple community programs, coordinating with various stakeholders. It's complex, but definitely doable with the right systems in place." "What about my wedding?" Catherine asked suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "I mean, I understand this is much bigger than just one event, but..." "Your wedding could be the perfect launch point," I replied, reaching for another file. "I've been thinking about this. What if we used it to showcase not just the Rosewood estate, but the entire vision? Instead of just another high society wedding, it could be the inaugural event that introduces our community initiative to the world." David leaned forward, clearly intrigued. What exactly are you suggesting? A portion of your wedding budget would go directly to funding the first community venue's renovation. We could document the entire process, showing how one celebration can create lasting impact. The media coverage you're planning could focus not just on the wedding itself, but on the positive changes it's helping to create. Catherine's eyes lit up with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since we were children planning makeshift tea parties in grandmother's garden. We could involve local artists in the decorations, feature community vendors, maybe even include some of the scholarship students in the planning and execution, I finished, smiling at her unexpected enthusiasm. Exactly. Turn it into a learning opportunity while creating something beautiful. My mother, who had been quietly reviewing her portfolio, finally spoke. This isn't just about weddings anymore, is it? This is about creating a legacy, one that goes beyond our family name. That's what grandmother was trying to teach us all along, I replied. She didn't just build a catering company. She built relationships, created opportunities, made people's dreams possible. Her client list wasn't just a business asset. It was a network of people who believed in making special moments accessible to everyone. Standing up, I walked to a cabinet in the corner and retrieved an old, worn leather journal. This was grandmother's last project before she passed away. She was planning to convert her catering kitchen into a training facility for aspiring chefs from underprivileged backgrounds. She never got to realize that dream, but she laid the groundwork. Everything I'm doing now, it's building on her foundation. Opening the journal, I revealed detailed notes, sketches, and plans in our grandmother's familiar handwriting. She believed that success wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about creating opportunities for others to succeed. That's the real legacy I want to build, not just preserving beautiful spaces, but making them work for the greater good. 2 weeks after our family meeting, the Rosewood Estates conference room had transformed into command central for our community venues initiative. Blueprints and planning documents covered the walls, while digital displays showed real-time progress updates for each location. The energy in the room was electric as our newly formed team gathered for their first official meeting. The Historical Society approved our proposal for all 5 properties, I announced, pinning up photos of each venue. They were particularly impressed by our comprehensive restoration plans and community engagement strategy. David, your firm's involvement was a major selling point. David nodded, spreading out his preliminary architectural assessments. We've completed initial surveys of all 5 properties. The Thompson Street location needs significant structural work, but the others are primarily cosmetic. We can begin renovation on the first 2 properties within the month. James, who had spent the past week adapting his project management platform for our needs, pulled up a detailed timeline on the main screen. I've created a centralized system to track all 5 renovations simultaneously. Each venue has its own project dashboard, but they're all interconnected so we can share resources and identify potential synergies. That's brilliant, Rachel commented, studying the interface. This will be incredibly helpful when we start training the scholarship students. Speaking of which, she turned to me with barely contained excitement. We received over 200 applications for the first round of scholarships in just 1 week. The number surprised even me. We hadn't formally announced the program yet. Word had spread organically through community organizations and social media. Have you started reviewing them? Yes, and Alexandra, the stories these applicants are sharing. Rachel's voice filled with emotion. There's a former military event planner who wants to create spaces for veteran support programs. A restaurant worker who's been organizing neighborhood celebrations out of her garage. A retired teacher who's been helping low-income families plan meaningful celebrations on tight budgets. My mother, who had taken her proposed role as community liaison seriously, spoke up. I've been reaching out to my contacts about partnership opportunities. The Symphony Society is interested in using the venues for their youth outreach programs. The Art Institute wants to discuss rotating exhibitions in the public spaces, and several corporate foundations have expressed interest in supporting the scholarship program. The transformation in my mother over the past 2 weeks had been remarkable. Her networking skills, once focused solely on social climbing, were now being channeled into creating meaningful connections. She had approached her new role with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since I was a child. Catherine, who had been quietly reviewing event proposals, looked up from her tablet. "I've been thinking about the media strategy. Instead of just focusing on my wedding, what if we documented the entire journey? From the renovations through the first year of programs, show the real impact these venues will have on their communities. A documentary approach?" I considered the idea. That could be powerful. "More than that," Catherine continued, warming to her subject. "We could create a series of short films, each focusing on a different aspect: the scholarship students, the community programs, the local artists and vendors we'll be working with. Real stories about real people making real changes in their communities." The passion in her voice reminded me of when we were young, before society's expectations had pushed us onto different paths. Back then, Catherine had dreamed of telling stories that mattered. Perhaps this project could help her rediscover that passion. "There's something else we need to discuss," my father interjected, pulling out a thick folder of financial documents. "I've been reviewing the funding structure for the foundation, and I have some concerns, not about its viability, but about its potential for growth." Everyone turned to him, surprised by his serious tone. "These venues could be just the beginning," he continued. "With the right financial structure, we could create a model that could be replicated in other cities. But to do that, we need to think bigger." He spread out a series of charts and projections. "I've been running the numbers. If we leverage the success of the Rosewood estate and structure these community venues properly, we could create a self-sustaining system that generates enough revenue to fund expansion. Each successful venue could help launch another, creating a ripple effect of positive change." The early morning sun streamed through the windows of our first community venue as I walked through its partially renovated halls. The Thompson Street location, once considered the most challenging of our 5 properties, was already showing signs of its future potential. The sound of construction echoed through the building as David's team worked alongside our first group of scholarship students who were learning about historical preservation hands-on. "Ms. Pierce!" Maya, one of our scholarship recipients, hurried toward me with excitement in her eyes. A former military event coordinator, she had already proven herself invaluable in organizing our workflow systems. "You need to see what we discovered in the old ballroom." Following her through the building, I noticed how she navigated the space with confidence, already envisioning its future potential. We entered the ballroom where workers had carefully removed decades of outdated renovations to reveal the original architecture. "Look at this." Maya pointed to an intricate pattern emerging on the ceiling as layers of paint were stripped away. "The entire ceiling is covered in hand-painted medallions. And watch this." She pulled back heavy blackout curtains, allowing sunlight to stream through recently uncovered stained glass windows. The room exploded with color, the light creating dancing patterns across the floor. "This is incredible," I breathed, understanding immediately why she'd been so excited. "These windows must have been covered up for decades." "That's not all," David said, emerging from behind a temporary partition. "We found the original blueprints hidden in a wall cavity. This room was designed to work with the changing light throughout the day. The medallions and windows create different patterns as the sun moves. It's a masterpiece of architectural design that's been hidden away all this time." The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Beauty and potential hidden beneath years of neglect, waiting to be rediscovered and restored. Just like the people we hoped to help through this project. My phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Turn on Channel 5 now." Pulling out my tablet, I opened the local news stream. Catherine was being interviewed about her upcoming wedding, but she had skillfully turned the conversation toward our community initiative. "Yes, I'm getting married at the Rosewood Estate," she was saying. "But what's more exciting is how this celebration is part of something bigger. My sister Alexandra has created an amazing program that's transforming historical properties into community spaces." Watching her speak passionately about our project, I barely recognized the sister who had once been focused solely on her modeling career. She had found a new purpose in telling these stories of transformation and community impact. "Your sister is quite the advocate," Maya commented, watching over my shoulder. "The scholarship applications have doubled since she started doing these interviews." "Speaking of applications," Rachel's voice came from behind us. She had arrived, with a stack of folders. "We need to discuss something important. Remember that retired teacher I mentioned, the one who's been helping families plan celebrations?" I nodded, turning to face her. "Well, she's been doing more than just planning. Events. She's created an entire network of small business owners who help each other make celebrations possible for families in need. Florists who donate arrangements, bakers who offer sliding scale pricing, photographers who work pro bono. She's essentially built a community support system." "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need," I replied, already seeing the possibilities. "Have you talked to her about expanding her network through our venues?" "Better than that," Rachel smiled. "She's agreed to help us develop a formal program. We could implement it across all 5 locations, creating a sustainable system for making celebrations accessible to everyone." The sound of James's arrival interrupted our discussion. He burst into the room with his characteristic energy, but this time it wasn't about a new startup idea. "You're not going to believe this," he announced, waving his tablet. "Remember those project management tools we developed for tracking the renovations? The Historical Preservation Society wants to license them for their other restoration projects nationwide." "That's fantastic," I started to say, but James wasn't finished. "And that's not all. 3 other cities have reached out about replicating our community venue model. They have similar historical properties they want to repurpose for community use. Dad's expansion projections are already proving right." The boardroom of the Rosewood Estate hummed with tension as we faced our first major crisis. Just 6 weeks before Catherine's wedding, which was meant to be the grand showcase of our community initiative, we discovered serious structural issues in the Thompson Street venue's foundation that threatened to derail our entire timeline. "The damage is more extensive than we initially thought," David explained, spreading detailed structural reports across the table. "The previous owner's quick fixes masked severe deterioration. We can't proceed safely without completely rebuilding the foundation." "What's the impact on our timeline?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. 3 months minimum," David replied grimly. "And that's being optimistic. The cost will be significant too, at least double our initial renovation budget for this property." My father leaned forward, studying the financial projections. "This could affect our ability to proceed with the other venues on schedule. We'd need to reallocate resources, adjust our funding structure." "We can't delay the other properties," my mother interjected. She had spent weeks building relationships with community organizations, each venue carefully matched with local needs. These communities are counting on these spaces. The youth orchestra program alone has enrolled 60 children for summer classes. James ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "The project management system shows we're already committed to contractors and suppliers for the other venues. Changing those schedules would trigger penalty clauses, not to mention damaging relationships we've worked hard to build." I watched my family tackle this challenge, marveling at how naturally they had stepped into their roles. 6 months ago, they would have seen this as just another failed business venture. Now they were fully invested in finding solutions. "What if," Catherine spoke up hesitantly, "what if we used my wedding as more than just a showcase? What If we turned it into a fundraising opportunity? All eyes turned to her as she continued with growing confidence. Think about it. We already have influential guests coming, media coverage arranged, community partners involved. Instead of just showing what we plan to do, we could actively engage people in helping us do it. A charitable giving component to the wedding? My mother mused, her networking instincts engaging. That could work. Many of our guests regularly support community initiatives. If we present this properly. Not just charitable giving, I interrupted, an idea forming. What if we created an investment opportunity? Dad, you mentioned wanting to create a replicable model. This could be our proof of concept. My father's eyes lit up with understanding. A demonstration of both social impact and financial viability. We could structure it as a social impact bond, allowing investors to support community development while earning returns based on specific success metrics. James was already typing furiously on his laptop. I can modify the project management platform to track social impact metrics alongside financial ones. Show potential investors exactly how their money creates community value. And I can document everything, Catherine added. Not just the glossy final product, but the real challenges and how we overcome them. Show people that making a difference isn't always smooth sailing, but it's worth the effort. Rachel, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. Our scholarship, students could be involved too. They're already learning about venue management and event planning. This would give them practical experience in crisis management and community engagement. Maya, representing the scholarship cohort, nodded enthusiastically. We've been brainstorming ideas for community events. What if we organized a series of smaller fundraising events leading up to the wedding? Each one could showcase different aspects of what these venues will offer. The energy in the room had completely shifted. What had started as a crisis meeting was transforming into a strategy session, with everyone contributing ideas and solutions. There's something else to consider, David added thoughtfully. The foundation issues we discovered. They're probably not unique to this building. Other historical properties in these communities likely face similar challenges. If we document our restoration process, create detailed guides for addressing these structural issues, we could help other communities save their historical buildings, I finished, understanding his vision. Create a blueprint not just for event venues, but for historical preservation with community benefit. Looking around the table at my family, no longer focused on their individual achievements but working together towards something bigger than themselves, I realized that we had built something far more valuable than just a successful business. We had created a framework for turning challenges into opportunities, for transforming not just buildings, but lives. The week following our crisis meeting transformed the Rosewood estate into a hub of nonstop activity. The grand ballroom, usually reserved for wedding ceremonies, had become our command center, with different stations dedicated to various aspects of our emerging solution. The energy was palpable as our team worked to turn setback into opportunity. The first community fundraising event is confirmed for next Saturday, Maya announced during our morning briefing. She stood confidently at the head of the table, a far cry from the hesitant scholarship recipient she'd been just months ago. We're calling it Foundations of Change, playing on both the literal foundation issues and our broader mission. Perfect timing, Catherine chimed in, her tablet displaying the latest media coverage. I've arranged for local news coverage, and several social media influencers who focus on community development have agreed to participate. They're particularly interested in the historical preservation angle. The transformation in my sister continued to amaze me. Once focused solely on her own image, she had become a passionate advocate for community storytelling. Her upcoming wedding had evolved from a society event into a catalyst for change. Speaking of historical preservation, David interjected, spreading out a new set of blueprints. We've made an interesting discovery at Thompson Street. Those foundation issues we found? They actually preserved original architectural elements that would have been destroyed by previous renovation attempts. Once we stabilize the structure, we'll be able to restore features that haven't been seen in over a century. James, who had been typing furiously on his laptop, looked up with excitement. That ties in perfectly with the new tracking system we've developed. We can now monitor both the physical restoration progress and its impact on community engagement. Look at this. He projected a complex but elegant dashboard onto the main screen. It showed real-time updates on construction progress, community program development, and social impact metrics across all 5 venues. Each venue has its own profile, he explained, clicking through the interface. But they're all connected, sharing resources and information. When one location discovers a solution to a problem, it's immediately available to all the others. We're creating a learning network, not just a collection of buildings. My father, who had been quietly reviewing financial documents, added his perspective. The investment structure is coming together too. We've already received interest from several impact investors who like the combination of historical preservation and community development. But there's something else we need to consider. He pulled out a worn leather portfolio, one I recognized from my childhood. It was his planning notebook, the one he'd used to build his own business empire. I've been thinking about your grandmother's approach to community building. She didn't just run a catering company. She created opportunities for others to grow. What if we applied that principle here? What do you mean? I asked, intrigued by this reference to our grandmother's legacy. Instead of just accepting traditional investments, what if we created a community investment program? Allow local residents to buy small stakes in these venues, become true stakeholders in their success. My mother, who had been meeting with community leaders, immediately saw the potential. That could transform how these communities view the projects. They wouldn't just be users of the spaces. They'd be owners, partners in their success. Rachel, ever practical, was already considering the implementation. We could structure different levels of investment, make it accessible to families of varying means. Maybe even create a program where people could contribute sweat equity, volunteer hours, and skills in exchange for ownership shares. And our scholarship students could help manage this program, Maya added. We're learning about venue management, but this would teach us about community engagement and financial planning too. It's more than that, I realized, watching the idea take shape. We're not just restoring buildings or creating event spaces. We're building a new model for community development, one that combines physical restoration with social restoration. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Chen, owner of the local family restaurant that had catered many of our events, stood in the doorway with several other small business owners. We heard about your foundation problems, she said, stepping forward. Our businesses have been part of this community for generations. We've watched buildings fall into disrepair, seen communities struggle. But what you're doing here, it's different. We want to help. Mrs. Chen's arrival with her fellow business owners marked the beginning of something we hadn't anticipated. As our team gathered around the conference table, now expanded to accommodate our new guests, the energy in the room shifted from crisis management to community mobilization. We've been watching what you're trying to do here, Mr. Rodriguez, owner of the local hardware store, began. My family's store has been in this neighborhood for 3 generations. We've supplied materials for countless home repairs, watched buildings deteriorate because people couldn't afford proper maintenance. What you're proposing, making these spaces work for the community, it's what we've needed for years. Sarah Kim, who ran a successful local bakery, nodded in agreement. When Mrs. Chen told us about your foundation issues, we started talking, really talking, for the first time in years, about what these venues could mean for our neighborhood, for our children's future. As they spoke, Rachel quietly distributed copies of our latest project updates. I watched as these business owners, pillars of their community, studied our plans with intense interest. "You're not just fixing buildings," Mrs. Chen observed, looking up from the documents. "You're creating opportunities. The kind of opportunities that could keep our young people here, building careers in their own community instead of feeling they have to leave to succeed." My mother, who had been quietly observing, suddenly straightened in her chair. I recognized that look. She had spotted a connection others might have missed. "Each of you has expertise that could contribute to this project," she said. "Not just as supporters, but as active partners." The business owners exchanged glances. Mr. Rodriguez leaned forward. "We've actually been discussing that. My store can supply materials at cost. Mrs. Chen's restaurant network can handle catering for smaller community events. Sarah's bakery can provide apprenticeships for culinary training programs." "And that's just the beginning," Sarah added. "We've talked to other business owners too. The local printing shop wants to help with marketing materials. The florist is willing to create a training program for event decoration. The tech repair shop can help set up computer labs for youth programs." James, who had been rapidly typing notes, looked up with excitement. This could revolutionize our entire operational model. Instead of trying to build everything from scratch, we could create a network of local business partnerships at each venue. Each community could customize programs based on their existing resources and needs. David, ever the practical architect, saw immediate applications. The construction crews would certainly appreciate local hardware support. And having established community partners could help us better understand each neighborhood's specific needs as we renovate these spaces. Catherine, who had been filming the meeting for our documentation project, captured the growing excitement in the room. "This is the story we need to tell," she said. "Not just about restoring buildings, but about communities coming together to create lasting change." Maya stepped forward with a proposal she and the other scholarship students had been developing. "We've been working on a community engagement framework. What if we created a formal business leadership council? Each venue could have its own council of local business owners, working together to maximize community impact." Mrs. Chen smiled approvingly. "That's exactly what we were hoping for. We don't want to just support this project. We want to help shape it, ensure it truly serves our community's needs." My father, who had been reviewing the financial implications, spoke up. "This level of community involvement could significantly strengthen our social impact bond proposal. Investors would see that we have real community buy-in, not just institutional support." "It's more than that," I realized, watching the natural collaboration unfold. "We're not just creating venues or programs. We're building a new model of community development, one that leverages existing resources and relationships to create sustainable change." Rachel was already adapting our project timelines. "With this level of local support, we could potentially accelerate our renovation schedule. Local suppliers, reduced material costs, community volunteers. And we could expand our training programs," Maya added. "Instead of just teaching event management, we could offer business development courses, partnering with successful local entrepreneurs as mentors." 3 weeks after the local business owners joined our initiative, the Thompson Street venue had become a symbol of community revival. The foundation repairs, initially our biggest crisis, had turned into an unexpected opportunity for innovation. Instead of working around the community, we were working with it. Early morning sunlight streamed through the newly restored windows as I arrived for our daily progress meeting. The scene before me was unlike anything I had initially envisioned for this project. Mr. Rodriguez's hardware store employees were teaching our scholarship students about proper restoration techniques. Sarah Kim's apprentice bakers were setting up a temporary cafe in the future community space, providing free breakfast to the construction crews. "You need to see this," Rachel called out, gesturing for me to follow her to the basement level We descended the stairs, I heard the sound of animated discussion. The space that had once been water-damaged and deteriorating had been transformed into an impromptu education center. Mrs. Chen stood at a whiteboard, conducting what appeared to be a business planning session with a group of local high school students. Restaurant management isn't just about food, she was explaining. It's about creating experiences, building relationships, understanding your community's needs. We're calling it the Future Leaders Program, Maya explained, joining us at the entrance. While the construction crews work upstairs, we're using the basement for youth education programs. Local business owners take turns teaching different aspects of entrepreneurship. The innovative use of space perfectly embodied our project's evolution. Even during renovation, we were already serving the community's needs. That's not all, Rachel added, leading me to another corner of the basement. Remember those architectural features David discovered during the foundation work? Look what the tech shop kids did with them. A sophisticated 3D mapping display showed the building's historical evolution, created by local students under the guidance of the tech repair shop owner. Interactive touchscreens allowed visitors to explore different eras of the building's history, understanding its role in the community's development. They're calling it the Memory Project, James explained, appearing with his laptop. We're implementing similar programs at all 5 venues. Each building has its own story, its own connection to its neighborhood. The students are documenting everything, creating a digital archive of community history. My father arrived with a group of potential investors, their expressions shifting from skepticism to interest as they observed the bustling activity. "This is what I wanted you to see," he told them. "This isn't just about restoring buildings. It's about creating sustainable community development models." One of the investors, a woman I recognized as the CEO of a major foundation, watched as Mrs. Chen's students presented their business plans. "The integration of education and community engagement during the construction phase is impressive," she noted. "Most projects would wait until completion to begin programming." "That was actually our scholarship students' idea," I explained. They pointed out that community engagement shouldn't wait for perfect conditions. Every phase of development can serve a purpose. Catherine, who had been filming the morning's activities, joined us with her camera. "The contrast between 3 weeks ago and now is remarkable," she observed. "We should show the before and after footage at next week's community fundraising event." "Speaking of the fundraising event," my mother interjected, arriving with a stack of RSVPs, "we've had to move it to the main reception hall. The response has been overwhelming. Local businesses from neighboring communities want to learn how they can implement similar programs in their areas." David emerged from a planning meeting with his architectural team, excitement evident in his expression. "We've had a breakthrough with the foundation design. The solutions we've developed here can be adapted for other historical buildings facing similar issues. We're creating a preservation handbook that communities across the country can use." As Catherine's wedding day approached, the impact of our community initiative had begun to spread far beyond our initial expectations. The Thompson Street venue had become a case study in community-driven development, attracting attention from urban planners and community organizers nationwide. One particularly busy morning, I arrived to find a television crew setting up in the main hall. They weren't there for another of Catherine's wedding planning updates. This was a national news feature about innovative approaches to urban renewal. "You've created something extraordinary here," the reporter commented during our pre-interview discussion. "How did you move from managing high-end weddings to spearheading community development?" Before I could respond, a commotion at the entrance caught everyone's attention. A group of visitors had arrived, not our usual contractors or community partners, but representatives from 5 different cities, each facing similar challenges with historical properties in underserved neighborhoods. "I hope we're not interrupting." Their spokesperson, a city councilwoman from Chicago, apologized. But after seeing the preliminary results of your program, we couldn't wait for the official presentation next month. We had to see this in person. Rachel, ever efficient, quickly adapted our morning schedule to accommodate both the news crew and our unexpected visitors. As we toured the facility, each stop revealed another aspect of how our crisis response had evolved into a comprehensive community development model. In the former ballroom, now temporarily serving as a community education center, Mrs. Chen's students were presenting their business plans to a panel of local entrepreneurs. The sight of seasoned business owners mentoring the next generation of community leaders perfectly illustrated our project's multi-layered impact. What's remarkable, James explained to our visitors, pulling up data on his tablet, is how each component reinforces the others. The business education program provides skilled workers for the renovation project. The renovation creates spaces for community programs. The community programs generate interest from potential partners and investors. And it's all documented and replicable, David added, spreading out his latest architectural plans. We're creating detailed guides for everything, from historical preservation techniques to community engagement strategies. Any city can adapt these models to their specific needs. The Chicago councilwoman studied the plans intently. This could be exactly what we need for our Maxwell Street district. We have several historical buildings at risk, but traditional development approaches haven't worked. My father, who had arrived during the tour, saw an opportunity. The social impact bonds we've structured could work in other cities too. We're proving that community development can be both socially impactful and financially sustainable. If to demonstrate his point, Maya approached with exciting news. The first round of community investment shares sold out in less than an hour, she reported. We have local residents from every income level participating, exactly as we hoped. They're not just investing money, they're offering skills, time, and resources. The news crew captured this moment, the genuine excitement visible on everyone's faces. This wasn't staged for the cameras. It was real community transformation in action. My mother, who had been meeting with a group of cultural organizations, joined us with her own update. The arts integration program is expanding faster than we anticipated. We have local artists working with students to create installations for each venue, telling the neighborhood story through public art. That's not all, Catherine added, arriving with her tablet displaying social media metrics. The documentary series about the project has gone viral. People are sharing their own community revival stories, asking how they can implement similar programs in their areas. One of our scholarship students, Emma, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Ms. Pierce, remember how we worried about finding enough skilled workers for all 5 venues? Look at this. She gestured to a group of young people receiving hands-on training from Mr. Rodriguez's team. These are high school students from the vocational program, she explained. They're learning restoration techniques while earning credit toward construction certifications. 3 of them have already been offered apprenticeships with local contractors. The reporter, who had been filming these interactions, turned to me. This started with a wedding venue and a foundation problem. How did you envision it growing into something this comprehensive? The reporter's question lingered in the air, making me reflect on our journey. Just then, Rachel hurried over with news that would add another layer to our evolving story. The governor's office had called. They wanted to use our community development model as a template for a statewide historical preservation and community revitalization initiative. They're offering substantial funding, Rachel explained, handing me the preliminary proposal. But they want us to oversee implementation in 20 additional locations across the state. It's an incredible opportunity, but the scale. Before I could process this development, Maya appeared with another urgent update. The National Historic Preservation Society just released their annual impact report. They featured our project as a breakthrough model for combining historical preservation with community development. Their director is flying in tomorrow. to discuss potential nationwide implementation. The weight of these opportunities hit me all at once. We'd created something that was resonating far beyond our initial goals, but scaling up would bring enormous challenges. Looking around at the bustling activity in the Thompson Street venue, I saw both the potential and the complexity of expansion. James, sensing my contemplation, pulled up a new display on his project management system. "I've been anticipating this," he said. "Look at these scalability models. We've actually been building the infrastructure for expansion all along, even if we didn't realize it." His screen showed an intricate network of interconnected systems, everything from construction workflows to community engagement protocols, all designed to be replicated and adapted for different locations. "It's not just about the technical systems," my father added, joining our discussion. "The financial model we've developed, the combination of social impact bonds, community investment shares, and traditional funding, it's specifically designed to be scalable. Each community can adapt the ratios based on their local resources and needs." David, who had been listening while reviewing architectural plans, spoke up. "The preservation handbook we're creating, it's not just about building restoration. It's a comprehensive guide to community-centered development. Every challenge we've faced, every solution we've found, it's all documented and ready to share." Catherine, who had been filming these developments for our documentary series, captured the mix of excitement and apprehension in the room. "This is the next chapter of our story," she said. "Not just about one family or one community anymore, but about creating a movement." My mother, ever practical despite her growing passion for the project, raised an important point. Before we commit to expansion, we need to ensure we don't lose what makes this project special: the personal connections, the community involvement, the attention to individual needs. She was right. Our success wasn't just about the systems and structures we'd created. It was about the relationships we'd built. I watched as Mrs. Chen guided her student entrepreneurs through practice pitches, as Mr. Rodriguez demonstrated specialized restoration techniques to a group of apprentices, as Sarah Kim's culinary trainees prepared meals for the construction crews. "What if," Maya suggested, "we treated expansion the same way we approached our initial crisis? Instead of trying to control everything from the top down, we create a network of community leaders who can adapt our model to their local needs?" The idea resonated. Our strength had always been in empowering others, not dictating solutions. Why should expansion be any different? "We could create a leadership academy," Rachel proposed, already taking notes. "Bring potential community leaders here for intensive training. Let them experience our model firsthand, then support them as they implement it in their own communities." The visiting city officials, who had been quietly observing our discussion, grew animated at this suggestion. "That's exactly what we need," the Chicago councilwoman said. "Not just a blueprint to follow, but guidance on how to adapt it to our unique circumstances." As if to underscore the potential of this approach, a group of high school students from our tech training program rushed over with excitement. They had just completed a virtual reality tour of the Thompson Street venue's transformation, allowing people to experience our project's evolution from anywhere in the world. "We've already had requests from 3 other cities to create similar virtual tours of their historical properties," one student explained proudly. "They want to use them to build community support for their own restoration projects." The next morning brought a surprise that would reshape our approach to expansion. As I arrived at the Rosewood estate for what I thought would be a regular planning meeting, I found the parking lot filled with unfamiliar vehicles. Inside, the Grand Hall had been transformed into an impromptu conference space, filled with faces I recognized from news articles and industry publications. "They started arriving at dawn," Rachel explained, hurrying to meet me. "Community leaders from across the country who've been following our project. They didn't want to wait for formal channels. They came to see for themselves." Among the visitors were a retired teacher who had been fighting to save a historic school in Detroit, a community organizer from New Orleans working to preserve cultural landmarks, and a group of young entrepreneurs from Seattle trying to protect their neighborhood's character from aggressive development. "We saw your story," the Detroit teacher explained, "and realized we weren't alone in our struggles. We've all been fighting similar battles in isolation. But your project shows there's another way." James, who had been speaking with the Seattle group, called me over to his laptop. "Look at this," he said, pulling up a map dotted with points of light. Each point represents a community facing similar challenges. They've been connecting through our project's social media channels, sharing resources and ideas. My father, arriving with a group of financial advisors, added another perspective. These spontaneous connections could be the key to sustainable expansion. Instead of trying to manage everything centrally, we could create a network of autonomous but connected community development hubs. The idea caught fire immediately. Our visitors broke into impromptu working groups, sharing challenges and solutions from their own experiences. The New Orleans organizer described innovative funding approaches they'd developed after Hurricane Katrina. The Seattle entrepreneurs demonstrated technology they'd created to track neighborhood demographic changes. Catherine, filming as always, captured the organic collaboration. "This is better than any planned expansion," she observed. "These are the people who will actually implement these ideas in their communities. They know the challenges, the politics, the local dynamics." Maya and our scholarship students had set up a documentation station, recording detailed interviews with each visitor. "We're creating a database of case studies," she explained. "Real stories of community challenges and solutions that others can learn from." Mrs. Chen, arriving with her student entrepreneurs, saw immediate possibilities. "Our business education program could expand through these connections. Students could learn from successful community leaders across the country, not just local mentors." The energy in the room shifted when David arrived with an unexpected guest, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a renowned expert in urban development who had been critical of traditional renewal projects. She had been silently observing our impromptu gathering. "I came here skeptical," she admitted, addressing the room. "I've seen too many top-down community development projects fail. But this," she gestured to the spontaneous collaboration, "happening around us, this is different. You're not imposing solutions. You're empowering communities to create their own." As if to prove her point, the Detroit teacher was already deep in discussion with Mr. Rodriguez about adapting our vocational training program for her community. The Seattle group was working with our tech students to modify their neighborhood tracking software for wider use. The New Orleans team was sharing post-disaster preservation techniques with our restoration crews. My mother, who had been quietly observing, pulled me aside. "Remember when we thought this was just about fixing up old buildings for weddings?" she asked, smiling. "Look at what it's become. A movement for community empowerment." Rachel, ever practical, was already developing systems to support this organic growth. "We need to create tools these communities can use," she said, sketching out ideas. "Resource libraries, communication platforms, funding templates. But keep them flexible," James added. "Each community needs to be able to adapt these tools to their specific needs and culture." 3 days after our impromptu gathering, the Rosewood Estate had transformed into something that felt more like a community development think tank than a wedding venue. The visitors who had arrived spontaneously were now part of what we called the Community Preservation Network, and their collective expertise was reshaping our entire approach to expansion. "Look at what the Seattle team developed overnight," James announced during our morning briefing, projecting a sophisticated digital platform onto the main screen. "They've created an open-source version of their neighborhood tracking software that any community can customize." The platform wasn't just about tracking demographics or property values. It incorporated stories, oral histories, and cultural traditions that made each neighborhood unique. "This is how we preserve the soul of a community, not just its buildings," explained Marcus, the lead developer from Seattle. Meanwhile, in what used to be our bridal consultation room, the Detroit teacher had set up a virtual classroom connecting students from different cities. They were sharing their visions for their community's futures, brainstorming solutions to common challenges, and learning from each other's experiences. "The kids get it instinctively," she explained, beaming with pride as her students presented their ideas. "They don't see boundaries between cities or neighborhoods. They see opportunities for collaboration and growth." My father, who had been meeting with financial experts from various communities, emerged from the conference room with an innovative proposal. "We've developed something new," he announced, spreading out a series of documents. "A community development investment cooperative that can operate across multiple cities while maintaining local control." The model was brilliant in its simplicity. Each community would have its own investment pool, but they could share resources and support each other during challenging times. "It's like a mutual aid society for community development," he explained. "When one community succeeds, they can help others follow their path." Catherine, who had been documenting everything, shared an observation that caught everyone's attention. "Every community has its own version of Mrs. Chen," she said, referring to our local restaurant owner who had become a cornerstone of our program. "These natural community leaders have been working in isolation, but now they're finding each other and amplifying their impact." As if on cue, Mrs. Chen arrived with a group of food service entrepreneurs from different cities. They had been up since dawn, sharing recipes and business strategies, but more importantly, discussing how food could bring communities together. "We're creating a culinary heritage program," Mrs. Chen announced proudly. "Each community will document its traditional recipes and food stories, then share them through a network of community kitchens. It's about preserving culture while creating economic opportunities." David, who had been consulting with architects from various cities, added another dimension to our evolving model. "We're developing what we call adaptive preservation guidelines," he explained, displaying a series of architectural renderings. "Instead of forcing historical buildings into modern uses, we're finding ways to honor their original character while meeting contemporary community needs." The New Orleans team had been particularly helpful in this area, sharing their experiences in preserving buildings while making them more resilient to climate challenges. "It's not just about restoration," their lead architect explained. "It's about adaptation and survival." Maya and our scholarship students had taken on the role of knowledge managers, documenting and organizing the flood of information and ideas flowing through our network. "We're creating what we call the community wisdom library," Maya explained, demonstrating an elegant digital archive. "Every solution, every challenge, every lesson learned. It's all being preserved and shared." Rachel, who had been coordinating these various initiatives, saw patterns emerging that could help us structure our growth. "Each community needs 3 things to succeed," she observed: local leadership, technical resources, and community buy-in. Our role isn't to provide these things, it's to help communities discover and develop them within themselves. One week before Catherine's wedding, I stood in the garden of the Rosewood estate, watching as final preparations took shape. But this wasn't just any wedding preparation. It had evolved into something far more significant. The event had transformed into what the media was calling the Unity Celebration, a showcase of community collaboration and sustainable development. "The governor just confirmed," Rachel announced, rushing over with her tablet. "Not just ours, governors from 4 neighboring states are attending. They want to see firsthand how this model could work in their regions." The Thompson Street venue, once our biggest challenge, had become a symbol of possibility. Its restored ballroom now hosted a pre-wedding exhibition featuring success stories from communities across the country. Each display told a story of transformation, not just of buildings, but of people and neighborhoods. "Look at this," James called out, directing my attention to a live feed displayed on several screens throughout the venue. Communities from across the country were hosting simultaneous celebrations, each putting their own cultural stamp on the event while remaining connected through our network. "Seattle's outdoor market is amazing," Maya commented, watching their feed. "They've combined their local artists' work with historical preservation displays. And look at Detroit. They've turned their restored school gymnasium into a community showcase." The New Orleans team had transformed their venue into a celebration of local culture, with traditional jazz bands playing as residents shared their neighborhood's history through storytelling and art. Each location showed how our model could adapt to different cultural contexts while maintaining its core principles. My father emerged from a meeting with a group of international development experts who had flown in for the event. "It's not just catching on nationally," he reported. "We're getting inquiries from historic districts in Europe, Asia, and South America. They're fascinated by how we've combined preservation with community empowerment." Catherine, who had originally dreamed of a traditional society wedding, had become one of our most passionate advocates. She was now conducting tours for visiting dignitaries, explaining how her wedding had evolved into a catalyst for community change. "Every element of the celebration showcases local talent and businesses," she explained to a group of impressed visitors. "The flowers are from community gardens we helped establish. The catering combines traditional recipes from different neighborhoods. Even the music represents a collaboration between classical musicians and local artists." Mrs. Chen, who had become something of a celebrity in community development circles, was leading a workshop on integrating local businesses into preservation projects. "Success isn't just about saving buildings," she told her audience. "It's about preserving the economic and cultural ecosystem that gives these buildings life." David's architectural team had created an innovative display showing the ripple effects of our project. "When we restore one building," he explained, pointing to a dynamic 3D model, "we don't just preserve history, we create opportunities for the future. Each restored structure becomes a catalyst for neighborhood revival." The scholarship students had taken ownership of different aspects of the celebration, each applying their unique skills and perspectives. Some led tours, others managed logistics, and a few had even developed new technological solutions for event coordination. "We've created something that will outlast any single event or project," Maya observed, watching her fellow students in action. "This isn't just about weddings or historic buildings anymore. It's about empowering communities to shape their own futures." My mother, who had once measured success by social status, now saw it differently. "Look at how these communities support each other," she said, gesturing to the various video feeds showing celebrations across the country. "When one succeeds, they all succeed. That's real status, making a difference in people's lives." As evening approached, the garden began to glow with thousands of lights, each one representing a community member who had contributed to the project. The effect was breathtaking, a physical manifestation of how individual efforts could combine to create something extraordinary. The morning of Catherine's wedding dawned clear and bright, but the day would bring far more than just a celebration of marriage. The Rosewood Estate had become the epicenter of a movement that none of us could have imagined when this journey began. "The international delegations are starting to arrive," Rachel reported, her tablet displaying a constant stream of updates. Representatives from historic districts in Paris, Prague, and Kyoto. "They're not just here for the wedding, they want to understand how we've made preservation economically sustainable." In the main hall, a sophisticated holographic display, created by our tech team in collaboration with students from across the network, showed real-time updates from community projects worldwide. Each point of light represented a neighborhood using our model to preserve its heritage while building its future. "We've confirmed participation from over 300 communities today," James announced, monitoring the network activity. "Each one will be hosting their own local celebration while connecting to our main event. It's become a global demonstration of community empowerment." The Thompson Street venue, our original challenge, had been transformed into a living museum of community development. Interactive exhibits showed the journey from crisis to opportunity, featuring stories of local businesses, student achievements, and neighborhood revival. "Remember when we thought the foundation problems would derail everything?" David mused, standing in the beautifully restored ballroom. "Now we're teaching other communities how to turn structural challenges into opportunities for innovation." My father, who had once measured success purely in financial terms, was leading a discussion with international development banks. "The model we've created isn't just about preserving buildings," he explained. "It's about creating sustainable economic ecosystems that benefit entire communities." Mrs. Chen and her network of local business leaders had transformed the venue's grounds into a marketplace showcasing community enterprises. Artisans, craftspeople, and entrepreneurs from different neighborhoods displayed their work, each contributing to the area's cultural and economic vitality. "This is what real wealth looks like," she said proudly, gesturing to the bustling marketplace. "Not just money in the bank, but opportunities created, traditions preserved, and communities strengthened." Maya and our scholarship students had taken the initiative to create what they called the Future Leaders Forum, running alongside the main celebration. Young people from different communities shared their visions for neighborhood development, combining traditional wisdom with innovative solutions. "We're not just learning about community development," Maya explained to a group of international observers. "We're actively shaping how it evolves. Each community brings its own perspective, its own challenges, and its own solutions." Catherine, who had once dreamed of a traditional society wedding, now stood at the center of something far more meaningful. Her celebration had become a symbol of how personal milestones could contribute to community growth. "Every element of this wedding tells a story," she explained to a documentary crew. "The flowers were grown in community gardens we helped establish. The music combines classical pieces with local cultural traditions. Even the menu represents a collaboration between traditional caterers and neighborhood food entrepreneurs." The technical infrastructure James had developed had evolved into a global platform for community collaboration. "We're not just sharing information," he demonstrated, showing how communities could connect and support each other in real time. "We're creating a network of mutual support and shared resources." My mother, watching the various elements come together, reflected on how far we'd come. "When this started, I thought success meant having the most exclusive venue," she admitted. "Now I understand that true success is about creating something that benefits everyone." As the celebration began, the venues across our network came alive with activity. Each location added its own cultural elements while remaining connected to the larger celebration. In Seattle, local artists performed traditional tribal dances. In New Orleans, jazz bands led community parades. In Detroit, student choirs sang in the restored school auditorium. The evening brought an unexpected announcement from the governor's office. Inspired by our success, they were establishing a statewide community heritage fund, with our network serving as the model for implementation. Other states were already expressing interest in creating similar programs. As the wedding celebration reached its peak, I found a quiet moment in my office at the Rosewood Estate, watching the festivities through the window. The sight before me was far from what I had imagined when this journey began. Instead of just another high society wedding, we were witnessing a convergence of community spirit, innovation, and transformation. "Alexandra?" My grandmother's old friend, Eleanor, appeared in the doorway. She had traveled from across the country to attend, bringing with her a weathered leather portfolio I'd never seen before. "I think it's time you saw this." Inside the portfolio were detailed plans, sketches, and notes, all in my grandmother's handwriting. They outlined a vision remarkably similar to what we had created, dating back decades. "Your grandmother dreamed of something like this," Eleanor explained. "She saw how celebrations could bring communities together, how preservation could mean more than just saving buildings." The discovery sparked a wave of emotion. All this time, I'd thought I was forging a new path, but I had been following in my grandmother's footsteps without even knowing it. Her catering business hadn't just been about food. It had been about creating spaces where communities could come together and thrive. Rachel appeared with urgent news that pulled me back to the present. The United Nations Development Program just reached out, she announced excitedly. They want to include our community preservation model in their global sustainability guidelines. They're particularly interested in how we've combined cultural preservation with economic development. Before I could process this, Maya rushed in with her own update. You need to see what's happening in the marketplace, she insisted, leading us outside. The community vendors had spontaneously organized a skill-sharing program. Artisans from different neighborhoods were teaching each other traditional crafts, creating new fusion styles that honored multiple cultural heritage. This is exactly what your grandmother envisioned, Eleanor commented, watching the scene unfold. She always said that true preservation wasn't about freezing things in time. It was about keeping traditions alive by allowing them to grow and evolve. James appeared with remarkable data from our network. Communities that had adopted our model were showing significant improvements in various metrics: increased local business ownership, higher youth engagement in community projects, stronger cultural preservation efforts, and improved economic stability. But the most interesting pattern, he explained, pulling up detailed analytics, is how these communities are supporting each other. When one area faces challenges, others step in with resources and expertise. It's creating a resilient network that's greater than the sum of its parts. David joined us with architects from the international delegations. They had been studying how our preservation techniques could be adapted for different cultural contexts. We're not just preserving buildings, one architect from Kyoto explained. We're preserving the stories, skills, and traditions that give these places meaning. My father, who had been deep in discussion with international development experts, shared another perspective. What we've created here goes beyond community development, he observed. It's a new model of sustainable growth that balances preservation with progress, tradition with innovation. Catherine, taking a break from her wedding celebrations, found us in the midst of these discussions. You know what's amazing? She said, still in her wedding dress, but more focused on the community impact than her own celebration. Every person here feels like they're part of something bigger than themselves. That's what makes this different from any other wedding I've attended. Mrs. Chen appeared with a group of young entrepreneurs from various communities. They had been inspired by our model to start their own initiatives, each adapting our approaches to their unique local needs. This is how change happens, she said wisely. Not from the top down, but from within communities themselves. The evening brought another surprise. A group of international heritage organizations announced the creation of a global fund for community-based preservation projects, using our model as a template. They had been quietly observing our progress and saw the potential for worldwide impact. As the wedding celebration continued into the evening, something remarkable began to unfold. The international delegates, community leaders, and local residents naturally formed working groups, sharing ideas and forming connections that would extend far beyond this single event. The Rosewood Estate had become more than a venue. It was a catalyst for global change. Look at this, James called out, directing my attention to the live feeds from our network. Communities across different time zones were passing the celebration, like a torch. As evening fell in one location, morning celebrations were beginning in another, creating a continuous wave of community engagement circling the globe. A group of urban planners from Singapore had been particularly moved by our approach. We've been struggling with preserving our heritage buildings while maintaining economic viability, their lead planner explained. Your model shows how preservation can actually drive economic growth when communities are truly involved. Maya and her fellow scholarship students had organized an impromptu think tank in the garden house, where young leaders from different communities were mapping out future collaborations. We're creating what we call heritage innovation hubs, she explained, showing me their plans. Each community will specialize in different aspects of preservation and development, then share their expertise through the network. The marketplace had evolved into a living laboratory of cultural exchange. Traditional craftspeople were finding ways to combine their techniques with modern technology, creating new forms of artistic expression that honored the past while embracing the future. A woodcarver from our community was working with a digital artist from Seattle, creating hybrid art forms that told stories of both tradition and innovation. This is what sustainable preservation looks like, David observed, watching the collaborations unfold. It's not about choosing between past and future. It's about finding ways to let them enrich each other. Rachel appeared with news that perfectly illustrated this point. The Historical Society had been monitoring the economic impact of our initiatives, and the results were compelling. Communities that had adopted our model were showing significant increases in local business ownership, youth employment, and cultural tourism. But here's the most interesting part, she explained, pulling up detailed reports. The stronger the community engagement, the better the economic outcomes. Places that really embrace the collaborative aspect of our model are seeing the biggest improvements. My father, who had been meeting with international development banks, shared another perspective. What's impressed them most isn't just the economic metrics, he said. It's how we've made preservation financially sustainable while strengthening community bonds. They're calling it the Heritage Community Nexus model. Catherine, who had stepped away from her wedding reception to join these discussions, offered her own insight. Remember when we thought success meant individual achievement? She reflected. Now we understand that real success is about lifting entire communities. Mrs. Chen had gathered a group of local business owners from different cities who were creating what they called heritage enterprise networks. These networks would help traditional businesses adapt to changing times while preserving their cultural significance. It's not just about saving old businesses, she explained. It's about helping them evolve while keeping their cultural heart intact. A century-old bakery can use modern methods and still preserve traditional recipes. A family-owned craft shop can sell online without losing its personal touch. The technical infrastructure James had developed was evolving in real time as communities added their own innovations. Each location is contributing unique solutions, he demonstrated. When one community solves a problem, the entire network benefits. As night fell, the celebration took on an almost magical quality. The restored buildings were illuminated with subtle lighting that highlighted their architectural features while creating welcoming spaces for community gathering. The effect was both historic and contemporary, much like our entire approach. Your grandmother would be proud, Eleanor said softly, joining me as I watched the scenes unfold. She always said that the most important preservation wasn't of buildings or traditions, but of community spirit. Everything else flows from that. As the wedding celebration continued, a surprising development emerged that would take our initiative in an unexpected direction. A group of students from our technology program had been quietly working on something revolutionary in the venue's newly established innovation lab. We call it the Heritage Preservation Network, explained Sarah, one of our youngest tech students. She projected a sophisticated 3D visualization, showing an interconnected web of historical sites worldwide. It's not just about sharing information. It's about creating a living archive of community knowledge. The system they developed went far beyond traditional documentation. Using advanced AI and community input, it could predict which historical sites might be at risk and suggest preservation strategies based on successful interventions from similar communities worldwide. Watch this, Sarah demonstrated, selecting a historical district in Chicago. The system immediately identified comparable neighborhoods that had faced similar challenges, showing how they'd overcome them. But it didn't just focus on buildings. It tracked community engagement, economic impacts, and cultural preservation efforts. James, who had been observing the presentation, realized the implications immediately. This could revolutionize how we approach preservation globally, he said, already seeing possibilities for expansion. Communities wouldn't have to start from scratch. They could learn from every success and failure in our network. Rachel rushed in with news that perfectly complemented this development. The United Nations Educational Committee had been monitoring our progress and wanted to establish what they called Heritage Innovation Centers based on our model. These centers would combine preservation technology, community development, and cultural education. But here's the really exciting part, Rachel continued, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. They want to start with communities that are typically overlooked for international development projects. Places where traditional preservation methods haven't worked because they didn't account for local needs and customs. My father, who had been in discussions with international development banks, saw the financial implications. This could change how we fund preservation projects worldwide, he explained. Instead of one-time grants for building restoration, we could create sustainable funding models that support both preservation and community development. Maya and her fellow scholarship students had already begun adapting their training programs for international implementation. We're creating what we call Community Heritage Leaders programs, she explained, showing me their curriculum. It combines technical preservation skills with community organizing and cultural advocacy. The marketplace had evolved into an impromptu international bazaar as visiting community leaders shared their local traditions. A textile artist from Peru was collaborating with a digital designer from Japan, creating patterns that told stories of both their cultures. A traditional musician from Morocco was working with a sound engineer from Seattle, finding ways to preserve ancient melodies using modern technology. Mrs. Chen, who had been mentoring food entrepreneurs from different communities, shared an observation that captured the essence of our evolution. When I started my restaurant, I thought I was just preserving my family's recipes, she reflected. Now I understand that every dish we serve helps tell our community's story. That's what true preservation means. Keeping stories alive through everyday actions. Catherine, taking a break from her wedding celebrations, had been filming these interactions for our documentary series. This isn't just about preserving the past, she noted, reviewing the footage. It's about giving communities the tools to shape their own futures while honoring their heritage. David's architectural team had been particularly moved by the Students' Preservation Network. They immediately saw applications for their work. We can use this to predict structural issues before they become critical, he explained, already sketching modifications to their preservation guidelines. But, more importantly, we can help communities understand why certain buildings matter to their cultural identity. As evening deepened, the various screens around the venue displayed live feeds from communities worldwide, each adding their own perspective to our growing network. A small village in Thailand showed how they'd adapted our model to preserve traditional crafts. A neighborhood in Brazil demonstrated how they'd used our techniques to revitalize their historic district while maintaining its cultural character. The wedding celebration had entered its final hours when something extraordinary began to unfold. The Heritage Preservation Network had detected an unexpected pattern in the data flowing through our global connections. Communities that had adopted our model weren't just preserving their heritage, they were experiencing what the system termed a cultural renaissance. Look at these metrics, Sarah explained, pulling up a series of visualizations. When communities start preserving their physical heritage, it triggers a cascade effect. Local artists rediscover traditional techniques. Young people get interested in their cultural history. Small businesses find ways to blend tradition with innovation. The evidence was playing out in real time across our network. In a small town in Italy, a group of teenagers had used our technology to create virtual tours of their historic district, adding layers of oral history and personal stories. In Morocco, artisans were using our platform to connect with designers worldwide. creating contemporary pieces that honored traditional craftsmanship. But here's what's truly remarkable, James added, showing another layer of data. These communities are starting to cross-pollinate ideas. A preservation technique developed in Japan is being adapted for use in Mexico. A community engagement strategy from Brazil is being implemented in Norway. Rachel burst in with news that underscored this phenomenon. The World Bank had been analyzing our impact and had reached a startling conclusion. Communities using our model were showing significant improvements not just in economic metrics, but in social cohesion, youth engagement, and cultural vitality. They're calling it the heritage effect, she explained, sharing their preliminary report. When people feel connected to their community's history and culture, they become more invested in its future. They're more likely to start businesses, participate in local government, and support education initiatives. My father, who had been reviewing the financial implications, saw something deeper in these patterns. This isn't just about preserving buildings or traditions, he reflected. We're helping communities rediscover their identity and strength. The economic benefits are just a side effect of that fundamental transformation. Maya and her fellow scholarship students had been documenting these transformations through a series of case studies. Every community has its own version of success, she explained, showing me their findings. For some, it's about preserving traditional crafts. For others, it's about adapting historical spaces for modern needs. But they all share one thing: a renewed sense of pride and possibility. Mrs. Chen, who had been mentoring food entrepreneurs from various communities, shared a perspective that captured this evolution perfectly. When we started, we thought we were just trying to save old buildings, she said, gesturing to the vibrant marketplace around us. Now we understand that we're really preserving the soul of our communities, the stories, skills, and connections that make each place unique. Catherine, who had been capturing these moments for our documentary, found herself drawn to the personal stories emerging from different communities. Every preservation project has become a story of revival, she observed, reviewing her footage. We're not just saving physical spaces. We're creating environments where people can reconnect with their heritage and imagine new possibilities. David's architectural team had made a fascinating discovery in their analysis of successful projects. The buildings that thrive aren't necessarily the most historically significant, he explained, showing a series of case studies. They're the ones that communities have emotional connections to, the places where memories were made, where traditions were passed down. As the evening progressed, our screens displayed a continuous stream of updates from communities worldwide. A neighborhood in Seoul had adapted our model to preserve traditional hanok houses while creating spaces for modern artists. A district in Buenos Aires was using our platform to document the evolution of tango culture while supporting contemporary musicians. As midnight approached at the Rosewood Estate, an unexpected discovery in our heritage preservation network sparked a new phase in our journey. The AI system had identified a pattern that none of us had anticipated, a phenomenon we would come to call the community echo effect. The data shows something fascinating, Sarah explained, projecting a complex visualization across the Grand Hall's walls. When one community successfully preserves its heritage, it creates ripples that influence communities up to thousands of miles away. But it's not just about preservation techniques, it's about hope and possibility. The system had detected that every successful project in our network became a catalyst for others. A small town in Maine that had restored its historic waterfront inspired a coastal village in Vietnam to reclaim its fishing heritage. A neighborhood in Barcelona that revitalized its artisan quarter motivated a community in Cape Town to preserve its traditional craft districts. But here's the most interesting part, James added, diving deeper into the analytics. These connections aren't just about sharing preservation methods. Communities are creating what we're calling heritage innovation corridors. networks of cultural exchange that strengthen both traditional practices and modern development. Rachel rushed in with news that validated these findings. The European CCUE Union had been studying our model and had made a groundbreaking decision. They were establishing a Cultural Heritage Innovation Fund, based on our approach, with an initial commitment of $500 million to support community-led preservation projects. They've recognized something crucial, she explained, sharing the official announcement. Traditional top-down preservation efforts often fail because they focus solely on buildings and artifacts. Our model succeeds because it empowers communities to preserve their living heritage, the skills, stories, and traditions that give places meaning. My father, who had been in discussions with development banks worldwide, saw the broader implications. This isn't just about preservation anymore, he observed. We're creating a new model of sustainable development that balances progress with cultural continuity. The economic benefits are impressive, but the social impact is transformative. Maya and her fellow scholarship students had been developing what they called heritage leadership academies, training centers where communities could learn not just preservation techniques, but strategies for cultural revival and sustainable development. Each academy will be unique to its region, Maya explained, showing the curriculum they'd developed. In Southeast Asia, we're focusing on traditional crafts and sustainable tourism. In Latin America, we're emphasizing cultural festivals and community markets. But they're all connected through our network, sharing insights and supporting each other. Mrs. Chen, who had become a respected voice in community development circles, shared an observation that captured our evolution perfectly. When we started, we thought success meant saving buildings, she reflected. Now we understand that true success is about empowering communities to write their own stories of revival and growth. Catherine, whose wedding had become a symbol of community transformation, had been documenting these developments for our international audience. Every community's journey is unique, she noted, reviewing footage from around the world. But they all share a common thread: the desire to preserve what makes them special while embracing new possibilities. David's architectural team had made a breakthrough in their preservation approach. We're not just restoring buildings to their original state, he explained, showing plans for several international projects. We're helping communities adapt historical spaces to serve contemporary needs while honoring their cultural significance. The marketplace had evolved into a living laboratory of cultural innovation. Traditional artisans were collaborating with digital creators, finding ways to preserve ancient techniques through modern technology. A weaver from Peru was working with a software developer from Korea to create an app that would teach traditional textile patterns to young artists. As the wedding celebration entered its final hours, our Heritage Preservation Network detected something remarkable, a spontaneous phenomenon we hadn't programmed for. Communities across the globe were forming what the system identified as cultural innovation clusters, organic collaborations that transcended traditional geographical and cultural boundaries. "Look at this," Sarah exclaimed, highlighting a particularly fascinating pattern. A group of indigenous artisans in Australia connected with traditional craftspeople in Finland through our network. They discovered surprising similarities in their storytelling traditions and are now creating collaborative art installations that blend both cultures. The system's AI had identified these clusters forming around shared challenges rather than shared geography. Communities facing similar preservation issues were finding each other and developing innovative solutions together, regardless of their location or cultural background. "This is revolutionary," James noted, analyzing the data streams. A small fishing village in Japan found a solution to preserving their traditional boats by adapting a technique developed by boat builders in Norway. They're not just preserving artifacts, they're keeping ancient skills alive by making them relevant to modern needs. Rachel burst in with news that validated these organic developments. UNESCO had been monitoring our network and had made an unprecedented decision. They were establishing a new category of World Heritage recognition specifically for communities using innovative approaches to preserve living cultural traditions. They're calling it dynamic heritage sites, she explained, sharing the official documentation. Instead of just preserving buildings or landscapes, this new category recognizes communities that successfully maintain their cultural traditions while adapting to contemporary challenges. My father, who had been working with international finance institutions, saw the broader implications. This changes everything about how we fund cultural preservation, he observed. Instead of one-time grants for physical restoration, we can create sustainable investment models that support ongoing cultural innovation. Maya and her fellow scholarship students had been developing a new initiative inspired by these spontaneous collaborations. We're creating what we call Heritage Innovation Labs, she explained, showing me their proposals. These are spaces where traditional craftspeople can collaborate with modern designers and technology experts to find new ways to preserve and evolve their cultural practices. Mrs. Chen, who had become a mentor to food entrepreneurs worldwide, shared an insight that perfectly captured this evolution. In my restaurant, we used to focus on preserving traditional recipes exactly as they were, she reflected. Now we understand that cuisine, like all culture, is alive. It grows and changes while keeping its essential spirit. Catherine, whose wedding had become a catalyst for these developments, had been documenting the unexpected outcomes. Every time we think we understand the full impact of what we're doing, something new emerges, she noted, reviewing footage from various communities. It's like we've started a conversation that keeps revealing new possibilities. David's architectural team had made a breakthrough in their approach to preservation. We've developed what we call adaptive heritage design, he explained, showing a series of innovative projects. Instead of just preserving buildings in their original form, we're finding ways to let them evolve while maintaining their cultural significance. The marketplace had become a living example of this approach. Traditional crafts were being reimagined through modern perspectives, creating new forms of cultural expression. A master calligrapher from China was collaborating with a digital artist from Brazil, creating installations that combined ancient wisdom with contemporary technology. As the evening progressed, our screens displayed a continuous stream of updates from communities worldwide. Each story represented a unique approach to preservation and innovation. A neighborhood in Istanbul had transformed their historic hammams into community innovation centers, while maintaining their traditional role as gathering spaces. A district in Mexico City had revitalized their traditional markets by incorporating digital technology while preserving the personal connections that made them special. As dawn approached on this extraordinary night, I found myself back in my office at the Rosewood Estate, the same place where this journey had begun with a simple decision not to let my family's dismissal define my future. The view from my window had changed dramatically, not just the physical landscape, but the entire world of possibilities it represented. Alexandra? Eleanor appeared in the doorway, holding my grandmother's old journal and a USB drive. There's something else you need to see. She placed both items on my desk. Your grandmother wrote this entry the week before she passed away, and the drive contains videos she recorded for you. With trembling hands, I opened the journal to the marked page. My grandmother's familiar handwriting filled the page with what seemed like a vision of everything we'd accomplished. My dearest Alexandra, I see in you what others miss, the ability to transform spaces into possibilities, to turn celebrations into catalysts for change. One day, you'll create something far beyond what I imagined. Remember, true success isn't measured by what you build, but by how many others you inspire to build their own dreams. The USB drive contained a series of short videos she'd recorded in her final months. In them, she shared not just her business wisdom, but her vision for how celebrations could transform communities. She had seen the potential long before any of us. Rachel entered with news that perfectly aligned with my grandmother's vision. The United Nations just announced a global initiative based on our model, she reported excitedly. They're calling it the Community Heritage Empowerment Program. It will provide resources and support to communities worldwide seeking to preserve their cultural heritage while fostering economic development. James appeared with data that validated everything we'd been working toward. The Heritage Innovation Network has identified something remarkable, he explained, pulling up complex visualizations. Communities that have adopted our model aren't just preserving their heritage, they're experiencing what we're calling a cultural renaissance effect. Traditional arts are being revived, local businesses are thriving, and young people are finding new ways to connect with their cultural roots. Maya and her fellow scholarship students had taken this concept further, developing what they called Heritage Innovation Incubators. These spaces would serve as laboratories where traditional knowledge could meet modern innovation, creating sustainable models for cultural preservation and economic growth. We're not just preserving the past, Maya explained, showing plans for the first incubator. We're creating bridges between generations, helping communities find ways to keep their traditions alive and relevant in a changing world. Mrs. Chen, who had become a symbol of how traditional businesses could thrive in the modern world, shared a perspective that captured our evolution perfectly. When we preserve our heritage, she observed, watching the sunrise paint the sky, we're not just saving buildings or traditions, we're keeping hope alive, hope that our children can build futures that honor their past while embracing their dreams. David's architectural team had made a final breakthrough that would shape our future work. We've developed what we call living heritage architecture, he explained, showing innovative designs that would be implemented worldwide. It's an approach that allows historical spaces to evolve with their communities while maintaining their cultural significance. Catherine, whose wedding had become a symbol of transformation, was already planning the next phase of our documentary series. Each episode will focus on a different community's journey, she explained, reviewing footage from around the world. We'll show how preserving heritage isn't about freezing the past. It's about giving communities the tools to shape their own futures. As the first rays of sunlight touched the Rosewood Estates gardens, I realized that what had started as a personal journey of vindication had evolved into something far more meaningful. We hadn't just preserved buildings or traditions, we had created a model for community empowerment that would continue to grow and evolve long after this moment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.